President Trump lashing out at the Federal Reserve and Fed Chairman Jerome Powell over the weekend. Senior economics reporter Steve Liesman joins us here now with more on this story. Steve?
Yeah, good fun. Well, not really. The president continues to bash the Fed and his handpicked chairman, Jerome Powell, even after the Fed made a major policy shift. Speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference on Saturday, President Trump didn't mention Powell by name, but made clear just who he was talking about.
We have a gentleman that likes raising interest rates in the Fed. We have a gentleman that loves quantitative tightening in the Fed. We have a gentleman that likes a very strong dollar in the Fed. Can you imagine if we left interest rates where they were? There's no inflation, essentially. There's no inflation. Can you imagine if we left interest rates where they were? If we didn't do quantitative tightening?
It was a 2-hour-plus speech in which the president cursed and had harsh words for many of his critics. By contrast, his criticism of the Fed, not as harsh as it was compared to other comments that he's made in the past. The president, though, clearly setting up Powell and the Fed to take blame should the U.S. economy falter. And several forecasters do see a slowdown this year, including the Fed. Some of the president's own policies, by the way, have helped strengthen the dollar, including those leading to better economic growth relative to others, and trade policies that have hurt other economies, which strengthen the dollar. Meanwhile, here's what you need to know. 4 of the 5 Fed governors are Trump nominees. So it's just a bit weird to have the president talk about his Fed chairman as some gentleman, which is the gentleman that he decided to put in charge of the Fed. And all of those folks, by the way, have voted for all of the rate hikes and the quantitative tightening.
I just love turning it on its head, quantitative tightening. And look, Kevin Warsh, who was the other top contender for Fed chair, has said that he wouldn't have raised rates as quickly, but he would be doing it by tightening the balance sheet, by quantitative tightening. It's kind of what he said in the past, too.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that the Federal Reserve should be normalizing amid an economy that did 3% plus growth last year. And by the way, there's 2% inflation, so inflation's on target. I mean, I can give you the tail of the tape here, right? So the Fed forecast 2% inflation. It got 2% inflation. That's going back to the December Statement of Economic Projections. The Fed forecast 2.5% growth. It got 3.1, okay, for year on year, okay? And the Fed forecast employment at 4% came in right on target. What did it do differently? It did a 1/4 point extra hiking in that context. Seems not unreasonable to me.
Steve, there was a debate 6 or so months ago before the Fed pivot that we were saying because the Fed is bashing, because the president is bashing the Fed, might that increase the Fed's resolve not to pivot, to really prove that they are independent? I guess the president might be thinking, well, it worked last time. I might as well keep doing this, and maybe they'll pivot even further.
That's not going to happen, I don't think, unless there's a dramatic change in the economy. Look, all I can say about this is I think the Fed tried to make the best decision it possibly could, but December was probably a close call on that rate hike. And if you could go either way, and the result was that you made clear your independence from the political body.
I'm glad they stopped, though. I'm glad they pivoted when they did, because we don't know what's happening in the economy. I like to see them watch and see what happens.
I think it's right. I think it's right, too. I think that 1/4 point. Look, I would personally like to see them get to 3. I want them to have a little bit more ammunition. I'd like to see the balance sheet continue to wind down, but I wouldn't do it at the cost.
The balance sheet, I'd rather see wind down, because I think there are fewer implications to Main Street when you wind down the balance sheet versus raising rates. I think raising rates hits people hard. It stops the housing sector, and that's one of the areas where we've seen a slowdown in the economy.
I think that's right. I will tell you, though, if we are going to be a 3% growth economy this year, there's going to be more Fed rate hikes.